Hi, everyone. So I'd like to ask you to imagine a hypothetical situation. A single mother, 3 kids, working a low-wage job. And like many families working low-wage jobs in this country, she's creative and she's ingenious about stretching every dollar she earns to make ends meet. But at the end of the day, it's just not enough. The cost of housing, childcare, healthcare, transportation, food, it's just too much. She falls behind a few $100s a month, and that means bill collectors wondering if she'll have enough money at the end of the month for food, not being able to afford emergency expenses, and the stress and the toil that takes in not being able to provide enough for her family. Imagine what the economic security and well-being of this family would be with just a few $100s more a month. This is a hypothetical scenario that I know is not too hard for you all to imagine. Most of us in this room work to improve public policies for people just like this family. And one of the most effective tools we have for that is the federal earned income tax credit that provides low-income working families cash assistance through a refundable tax credit, which is a wonky way of saying basically if you don't make enough money to owe federal taxes, you get some cash back in the form of a refund. And that kind of cash is exactly what this family needed. Even better, more than half the states in this country and the District of Columbia have actually enacted their own earned income tax credits, providing additional cash assistance on top of the federal credit. But not in California, at least not until 2015. So I'm here to tell you the story of the California Earned Income Tax Credit and the role that my organization played in making that happen, how we pried open policy windows and jumped through them, how we were creative and innovative along the way, and how we structured the EITC, and how we ultimately built an EITC in California that's providing $1 billion to 3 million California households. So you're probably thinking, why didn't you have an EITC before 2015? You live in a big blue progressive state. Why wasn't this enacted years and years and years ago? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. The first is that we're a big state with a lot of people. And in fact, we're a big state with a lot of people who live in poverty. According to the supplemental poverty measure, we have the highest poverty rate in the country, and by a ways. And that means enacting an earned income tax credit was going to be costly. And when things are costly, that means you're competing against other worthy needs and investments. And so it made it more difficult to pass an EITC in California than it might have been otherwise. It's also worth remembering that California hasn't always been a big blue progressive state. We're the state that brought you the property tax revolt in the late 1970s. And some of you probably remember that in the 1990s, California voters passed anti-affirmative action and anti-immigration measures. In fact, being a big blue progressive state is only a kind of a recent phenomenon. In fact, this year when Governor Gavin Newsom succeeded Governor Jerry Brown, it was the first time in California's contemporary history that a Democratic governor had followed a Democratic governor. So bottom line is that the policy window just wasn't open. But at the California Budget and Policy Center, we knew that wasn't good enough. We knew that Californians deserved better. So what changed? What happened? Well, a few things. First, coming out of the Great Recession, the state had not been able to build back from a whole series of very dramatic cuts that it had to make to get through the Great Recession to programs and services that were helping these low-income families in the state. They'd made some progress building back some of the programs, but hadn't been able to do enough. And that was happening at exactly the same time as heightened housing affordability crisis that was making it much more difficult for lots more families in the state to make ends meet. And there was heightened attention as well to widening income and wealth inequality. And so all of that attention meant that suddenly people were feeling like there was a lot more that needed to be done. But at the same time, we had a governor, Governor Jerry Brown, who had steered the state through that recession, in part through making those cuts, and was trying to hold the line on spending and was not very much of a fan of new programs and services. Governor Brown, for as successful as he was actually more known for his kind of doom and gloom projections about what was coming for the state of California. After 8 years in office, in his second 2 terms, in his very last budget address, when he was asked if he had any advice for the next governor of California, he famously said, "What's out there is darkness, uncertainty, decline, and recession. So good luck, baby. So I'm sure a number of you are thinking, I'd like to party with that guy. That's what we were dealing with, right? He was a very successful governor, but he was pretty stingy about new spending. But he was also taking a lot of heat, including from us, about the fact that he hadn't done enough, he wasn't championing enough to issues to address housing affordability and the inequality problems in the state. And so we thought, well, he's not a fan of programs and services so much, maybe we can get him to go for a tax credit. So what happened next? Well, a bunch of change makers, savvy folks across our state, including folks on my staff, saw an opportunity to create an EITC for the first time. Alyssa Anderson and Luke Reidenbach on my team in late 2014 started to map out options for structuring an EITC, what it would cost, who would be impacted, and we shared that with state legislators and sought out legislative champions. Frank Mecca with the County Welfare Directors Association started to work the hallways to find legislative champions who would champion that EITC and make it their signature issue. Our friends at the United Ways of California actually did the same thing and worked to get legislative champions to introduce legislation in both houses of the legislature. And all of that combined, the work we did together, eventually led to Governor Brown agreeing to a $400 million earned income tax credit, which sounds like a lot of money. And $400 million is a lot of money. But in California, it's not a tremendous amount, particularly for a credit that's needed by a lot of people. And so we structured that credit. We worked with the governor's office and we worked with the legislative leaders to structure it so that the credit was a very large credit, 85% of the federal EITC, but only for the very lowest income households, those making less than $15,000 in income. And because the governor agreed to the deal, it basically was a done deal. And after all those years, in the 2015-16 budget agreement, we finally had an earned income tax credit in California. As you might imagine, we were ecstatic. This is what ecstatic looks like at the Budget Center, by the way. Got to forgive us. As fiscal analysts, we don't celebrate very well sometimes. But we were ecstatic, right? After all those years, we'd done it. But we also knew at the same time that was, because it was a large credit, but for a small number of people, essentially, we could build it bigger. The Californians still deserve better. So what did we do next? Well, we helped build a big coalition of organizations, now 30 organizations or more in the state, who are working to expand the earned income tax credit and who we coordinate with and work with constantly to do that. Sasha Feldstein with the California Immigrant Policy Center is here with us in the audience today, and she co-chairs that coalition along with our friends at the United Ways of California. Our friends at the Economic Security Project, who are members of the coalition, I think you're here in the audience here today, and have been huge voices for expanding the EITC. And of course, the Center on Budget and our friends at ITEP have provided technical assistance and guidance and support all along the way. And together, we then made the case, we opened the policy windows for an expansion, or a set of expansions. In 2017, we expanded the earned income tax credit to self-employed workers for the first time. In 2018, we increased the income threshold on the credit, and we actually added or extended the credit to young adults ages 18 to 25 and to seniors 65 and older. And combined, those expansions expanded the EITC to more than 2 million households, a huge expansion set of expansions compared to where we started. And then an even bigger policy window opened with the election of Governor Gavin Newsom in late 2018. Gavin Newsom, you know, the guy with the hair, the teeth, the beautiful family, and those big national aspirations. The good news is he has some pretty big aspirations for California as well. And we knew he was potentially going to be an EITC champion because he'd enacted one in the city of San Francisco when he was mayor. So we immediately went to work. We put policy memos before his transition staff. We met with his transition and policy team. We worked with the EITC coalition to make the case for further EITC expansion. And we worked and coordinated with our legislative champions and the staff behind the scenes to make that case as well. And in his 2019 budget agreement, his first budget as a new governor this year, Gavin Newsom included the most significant expansion of the California EITC to date. The expansion included 3 provisions. First, it increased the income limit up to the state's $15 minimum wage, so that somebody getting an increase in their wages wouldn't be kicked off the earned income tax credit. Second, it increased the size of the credit for a whole series of households that had been receiving a smaller credit under the enactment and in previous expansions. And third, and perhaps most significant, it built a new young child tax credit inside of our EITC, essentially, that provides a $1,000 base credit to all families with one child, at least one child, under the age of 6. A $1 billion package. And what's even cooler for you tax policy nerds in the room is that Governor, and I know there's a lot of you, Gavin Newsom proposed to pay for this and the EITC enactment and expansions previously by closing a set of loopholes and credits in the state's tax code that would pay for that EITC with that additional $1 billion. Now, you might think this would be an easy lift, right? Big blue progressive state, it's in the governor's proposal. But the unique thing about California is nothing to do with tax policy is that easy. Our state requires a 2/3 vote of the state legislature to do anything that would raise taxes on any one individual. So taking those loopholes out of the tax code meant it was going to take a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So we went to work again. And we worked closely with the governor's office to make the case for that EITC expansion package. We held briefings with the governor in the governor's office. We worked closely with the Earned Income Tax Credit Coalition to make the case, and with other stakeholders who came to the table. We provided the research and analysis that was needed to make the case. And we even responded to some late-night data requests from the governor's chief of staff that helped them whip the votes for the final package. And in the end, they managed to get the 2/3 vote, and the 2019-20 state budget package included the most significant EITC expansion to date. So all told, if you go back to 2015 and look forward to 2019-20, where we are now, we started with a credit that was pretty small in size in terms of a few 100,000 households. We grew it over time, and it's now serving 3 million households with over $1 billion in credit. So one of the things I want to make sure I stress about this, though, is who are the beneficiaries. It's not just about the technical parts of the credit. The overwhelming majority of the people who were receiving the credit, this vital cash assistance, are women and children and people of color in our state. And so we're most proud about the fact that those folks now benefit from our state's earned income tax credit. And we're not done yet. We know Californians still deserve better. I'm very grateful that I get to tell you this story here today, but I really want to stress the we in all of this. My colleagues that I've mentioned earlier, and Sarah Kimberlin, another member of our team who we've added, and an entire group of staff that are amazing people and that I get to go to work with every day, supported this work and made this possible. The people and the organizations that comprise that coalition made this possible. And a set of legislative champions and their staff and folks in the governor's office worked and coordinated with us to make it possible. The we made this possible in California. I'm also deeply gratified to share this story with you for personal reasons. That hypothetical example I gave you at the beginning of this talk, it's not a hypothetical, as we all know, and it certainly wasn't for my family. That single mother with 3 kids, struggling to make ends meet, falling a few $100s behind a month, that was my family. And I vividly remember what that was like. The not having enough money to have for food at the end of the month, the housing instability, the bill collectors, and I think most importantly, the toil it took on my mother over time. Just imagine what a few $100s would have meant, like what we're now providing through the California EITC. So I'm personally and very deeply grateful to share the success that we've had in California, personally and professionally, that we as an organization, the California Budget and Policy Center, have played such an instrumental role in that. And as I said just a minute ago, I want to stress that we're not done yet. We have plans to expand the credit to all immigrant families in the state, to increase the size of the credit, to expand the income threshold, and to make the credit available to caregivers and low-income students. We've got big plans for this in California. We've built an earned income tax credit in California that's providing $1 billion to over 3 million California households and counting. Thank you very much.